Hello, everybody. Welcome to Amar's Game Chat. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe. I'm Amar, and today, in case you did not know, and to the surprise of many, I'm assuming, Nintendo did a huge blowout on the Splatoon series today, announcing Splatoon 3 10.0.0, as well as a new game in this series, the first ever spin off in the entire series, being Splatoon Raiders. I am very excited to talk about these games. It is a big moment, I think, just for the Splatoon, not just for the Splatoon fan base, but for the entire Nintendo sphere, and all the games that they're going to be announcing for the Nintendo Switch 2, as it is a Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive. And yeah, so I just wanted to talk about it for a little bit, talk about some of my first impressions of the game, as well as the new update. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So yeah, there was a lot of Splatoon news today. I think it was a pretty big surprise just because just a couple of weeks ago it was the Splatoon 10th anniversary, and assuming Splatoon 3.3 10.0.0, the 10th anniversary, and the announcement of a new Splatoon game, even if it's not a numbered game, it is the first spinoff in the series. I'm assuming these two things are tied to the 10th anniversary in general. It's a pretty big anniversary. It's Splatoon series released in May of 2015. So it sounds long ago in terms of just time, but it wasn't actually that long ago. And yeah, so they dropped this announcement on Nintendo Today Nintendo Today app before they even really dropped it anywhere else. So it was an exclusive announcement on there for about 20 minutes this morning until they put the trailer out everywhere else. And I think that's pretty cool. Was talking about that for a second. They've done that a couple of times now. I think maybe only like one major time before, but I think all the information they've dropped really on the app has been exclusive. We've gotten exclusive art, we've gotten exclusive like little sneak peeks at games like Donkey Kong Bonanza. But this is probably like the first major announcement outside of the Zelda old movie date, because they did delay the Zelda movie just yesterday to May 7th, 2027. So, I think that's about like a 6-week delay. But this is like the first major game announcement that we've gotten on Nintendo Today for, as a pretty much like exclusive breaking news type of thing. And so I think that's pretty cool. But in general, this is also probably the biggest game Nintendo has announced not in a Nintendo Direct, which is kind of interesting to think about. We've gotten announcements like Paper Mario The Origami King and Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity and Ring Fit Adventure and Nintendo Labo, and those kind of games outside of Nintendo Directs, like ones that I think in a lot of ways like they wouldn't necessarily be like closers in a direct, or they would be like a surprise announcement in a direct, but they wouldn't necessarily be like the biggest announcement sometimes in that direct. This probably could have been the biggest announcement in like a June like a summer direct, or like a September direct, or somewhere around there, and they didn't. Instead, they did do this little, I won't even say it's little because this is a pretty big announcement, but they did do this blowout Splatoon series, and they announced the game there. But yeah, so that was just a little bit of a ramble just to talk about that before we get into what the game itself is. I've been running the trailer in the background, so hopefully you all are able to see it. This isn't a reaction video just because with how surprising the news was today, and since they didn't like pre-announce that this video would like have a game announcement or like the update, it was just like an update from like the research lab talking about, and you click that, you're like, oh, maybe they're gonna do like a little thing about how they're adding a couple of weapons, or maybe they've gone back and they added support for the Nintendo Switch 2 with like better visuals. And that is pretty much a lot what the 10.0 update is. It is adding not really even compatibility between the Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2, because that already existed even before this update, but it added better visuals, better performance on the Nintendo Switch 2, as well as new weapons. Urchin Underpass is coming back from the Wii. I don't think it was in the Wii U, or maybe I don't think it was in the Switch version. I don't think it was Splatoon 2. I think it was just the normal Splatoon that Urchin Underpass was in. And then they added like a new, I believe like a new rank for anarchy battles, like the ranked battles of the game. So it's a pretty big update in general. It's not like a small update by any means. A new stage, new weapons, better visuals for Nintendo Switch 2. That's pretty big stuff. And like I said, I think maybe that's connected to the 10th anniversary, or maybe it's just coincidental that they did it this way. But I think the big announcement from all of this was the announcement of a new and the first Splatoon spin-off game, being Splatoon Raiders. So we didn't see much of it. It was about like a 50-second trailer, if even that, maybe a little bit longer, but we didn't see much. All we saw was like deep cut. This is going to be a story focused on deep cut and, those characters. Something that we didn't really get in Splatoon 3. The side order DLC and the first DLC, I think. Well, the first DLC brought you back to the lobby of Splatoon 1, and like it added, I think, like those characters back and everything. The Squid Sisters, I believe, was added through that update as well. But Side Order was focused on Pearl and Marina from Splatoon 2, so we didn't really see, so that DLC wasn't really that that focused on deep cut, or even really at all. And then the actual story from Splatoon 3, though it did involve those characters, it wasn't again focused on those characters exclusively like the Splatoon 1 story was on the Squid Sisters, and Splatoon 2 story was on Pearl and Marina, to a certain extent, obviously. But this is pretty much the deep cut story that I think a lot of people really wanted, because deep cut didn't really get a lot of like, I wouldn't say like they got a lot of promotion, but they didn't really get a lot of story content in Splatoon 3. So seeing that they're getting their own spin-off is pretty cool. But that is largely the focus of the trailer. We see Fry, Shiver, and I forgot his name. Give me a second. Let me get his name right. And Big Man. Shiver, Fry, and Big Man. We saw them be the main focus of the entire trailer, pretty much. Again, this is their story. We saw them in different scenarios. They're on like the main art for the game. I think, yeah, they are on the main art for the game. But it is also focused. I believe you're probably going to be able to import your character from Splatoon 3, just because I think that makes sense. I don't think they would like lock you out. Just because this again is a story with these three. I think it'd be, it would be important to connect your own Inkling or Octoling to the game itself as well. But that is all we really know about it. On the Nintendo website, they did say that in this new trailer released today, Nintendo announced the first ever Splatoon spin-off game, Splatoon Raiders, coming exclusively to the Nintendo Switch 2 system in the role of a mechanic. So, okay, there you go. I mean, I guess we can say our character is a mechanic. I mean, we'll see if they allow you to bring over like some of your attributes or anything to this game. But in the role of a mechanic, players will go on an adventure in the mysterious Sapphirlight Islands alongside the Splat-tacular Deep Cut trio. And that's pretty much all we know. We got some footage of it. In terms of maybe some of the scenarios, we see like a helicopter falling down. Like, so it's gonna be a very serious story. Not serious story, but like, it's going to be very story focused. We're gonna see, the deep cut trio in many different scenarios. I don't think this is gonna be multiplayer. We don't have any confirmation of that yet, but since it is a spin-off and it's not a numbered game, I think they are gonna focus pretty much exclusively on the story mode. I wouldn't be surprised if like they add like multiplayer in the form of like you and somebody else like locally can like do some mini games or something, but I think it is going to be very story based. I think it is going to be single player. And I think that's just because they're going to have a lot of different mechanics in this specific game that we probably wouldn't see in a like normal Splatoon stories, like the ones that we see like in the number games that are just like largely platforming and like finding like new ways to use the weapons in the game. I think we're going to see a lot more of just a larger focus on developing these characters and I think the platforming is definitely gonna be like a major focus here, but I wouldn't be surprised if like there isn't levels and like it's just a world to explore and that stuff like that. Almost like the interconnected world that we see in Mario Kart World. You can just run around and do whatever you want. There is missions that you could do, and but those are actually just happening in the world itself still. So I think that's what this game is going to be largely like, or play like in retrospect. Not retrospect, but just in general. I think that's how it's going to play. I think we're going to have a lot more platforming. I think it's just going to be like, I think if you would consider like the Splatoon stories to be something closer like 3D World, like Super Mario 3D World, I think this would be closer to like a mixture between Super Mario Galaxy and Super Mario Odyssey. Like it's going to be a world we can just run around and explore, stuff like that. It might not be level based, which I think would be very, very cool. But again, that is all we really see here. The trailer does end on what I'm assuming, and I don't think it ends necessarily, but it does pretty much like close on the like what I think I'm assuming is the main antagonist of the game. Um, you know, that's to be determined. It could be a surprise non-antagonist or like a character that you work with in the game, but I'm assuming not. I don't think they would have teased it that way. But yeah, in other scenes, like we see Shiver fishing, we see fishing in the game. So I think it's going to be an adventure game just in general. I think we're going to see, obviously the Splatoon weapons are going to be here. We see that throughout the entire trailer, but I think those weapons are going to coincide with like doing stuff like in the main world and, interacting with the characters. I don't know if they're going to like bring the whole cast of Splatoon 3 and I guess even Splatoon 1 and 2, like characters from all those games. I don't know if they would include those here, if we're gonna get like new characters to go alongside the deep cut trio. But again, that we really haven't seen much of it yet. It doesn't have a release date, so I think that probably means that it's not releasing this year. Obviously, they could surprise us, and if we do get a direct like in a couple of weeks or maybe like a month from now, they could announce it for like November. But it does feel like a summer game, like all the Splatoon games. It does feel like something that would come out like in the middle of the year, maybe a little bit later. Like Splatoon 3 came out in September, although I think that was probably slated for July, and like Xenoblade and Splatoon 3 like switch slots. But I wouldn't be surprised if this like releases like in May or June. Maybe they can do a same release date as Splatoon 1. Actually, in fact, let me look at the release date for Splatoon 1. I think that could be interesting. Give me a second. So, I'm not saying they're going to do this, but Splatoon 1 did come out on May 28th, 2015. I'm not sure. I think that might be the worldwide release date, or that could be the US release date, but I believe it did come out in okay, so it came out in Japan on May 28th, North America on May 29th, Europe on May 29th, and Australia on May 30th. Okay, so that makes this argument a little bit, maybe it doesn't even make this argument any weaker, but technically next May 28th, 2026 is a Thursday, and that has been the day that Nintendo has been choosing for Splatoon, not for Splatoon, for their first party releases since I believe since like Endless Ocean Luminous last year. They've been choosing the Thursday instead of a Friday release. May 28th is a Thursday. They could release it on May 28th and make this like the huge, just like a Splatoon celebration. 11th 1/1 Splatoon 1's release date. I don't know if they would do that, but I think that's pretty cool. Just like in general, I think that'd be kind of fun if they did it that way. But that is all we really have on Splatoon Raiders. I think there's a lot of theories we can talk about once we find out a little bit more about the game. How are the deep cut trio getting here? Obviously, we see helicopters like crashing in midair, not midair, but like not, and they're not really crashing, but they're falling down, and we see that in the trailer. That's probably how they get here. We have an emergency landing of some sort caused by maybe the antagonist in the game. But besides that, we do not know much more about what they are, what Nintendo and the Squid Research Lab are doing for Splatoon Raiders. But we did get, obviously, as I mentioned, and I emphasized at the beginning of this video, we are getting an update for Splatoon 3, the 10.0 update that is releasing on June 12th, 2025. It's possible it might release on June 11th. I would keep an eye out on that. It depends on like when the update is releasing in Japan. So if it's releasing as well on June 12th, that probably means it's going to be, a little bit later in the day. It really just depends on when it's releasing, I guess, like in Japan, because sometimes Nintendo will release like their updates like at noon on like the actual release date, or they'll wait and do it like the day before they advertise on like 9 or 8 or 9 p.m. ET. So I would keep an eye on it just in case they do release it maybe a little bit earlier than you're expecting, or they're really announcing here. But as I mentioned earlier, they are introducing 30 new weapon kits to the game. Urchin Underpass from the Wii U game is coming to the Nintendo Switch 2. Well, it technically is a Nintendo Switch 2 game now, but to Splatoon 3, as well as there'll be new freshness caps for all the weapons. I believe, yeah, it says plus all weapon freshness caps will be raised, and players can now earn new in-game badges. A new stat will be added to Anarchy Battle called Series Weapon Power. It will track a player's effectiveness per weapon based on their win-loss ratio in battles, and then will match them with players of a similar power. I think that's actually pretty cool. And then it basically ends on like the big part of this update, something we did not know before, but Splatoon 3 is getting a free update for Nintendo Switch 2, so it will run better, have better visual stuff like that. And you'll be able to play with all of your buddies and everything on Splatoon 3 if they're playing on Nintendo Switch as well. But that is really it for this announcement. Again, it was a pretty big announcement. Just the idea that they are, they would announce something like this, like a huge Splatoon game outside of a Direct and stuff like that, is pretty cool. As I mentioned, I think this is probably the biggest announcement, at least in the Direct era, that they've announced outside of a Direct. And yeah, so we might see another Direct. We might see a Nintendo Direct very, very soon. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see this game again, and maybe then we'll get a more detailed like release window, and obviously more information about like what the deep cut trio we're going to be doing in the game, what year we're going to be doing the game, who the antagonist is, and stuff like that. But that is all we have for today. So I hope you all are very, very excited for Splatoon Raiders. We are probably, if I had to guess, maybe like a year away from its release. So in retrospect, that's a very, not in retrospect, I keep saying in retrospect, but in time, obviously a year is pretty long, but I think it will go by pretty fast, especially if we start hearing a lot more about the game and seeing a lot more footage and just finding out what the game is like in the near future, maybe. But we'll definitely see it, I think, before the end of this year again. Okay, so that is all I have for you all today. So I hope you all enjoyed this little discussion video that I wanted to do. Normally I would do a reaction video, but again, I did watch the trailer early because I did not know what they would be announcing, because they didn't say what it was on Nintendo Today, and I watched it on Nintendo Today. I can actually give my reactions right here to the I don't have like reactions, but I have like text reactions. I can put them like right here just to display like what my reaction was, like my initial reaction. But yeah, that is all I have for you all today. So I hope you all are doing well and staying safe, and make sure you do makes you happy, because it rhymes with generic happy, my old name generic happy, and I'll see you next one. So goodbye. Happy 10 years of the Splatoon series.